Good evening and welcome back, dear traveler of the night. Settle into the quiet around you, let your breath soften, and let your thoughts drift like lanterns on a calm river. And tonight, we step into one of humanity's oldest shadows, the first shape that frightened, inspired, and guided our ancestors long before there were kingdoms or walls or written names. Tonight, we follow the birth of the dragon. Across thousands of years, across continents that never spoke a word to one another, people imagined a creature vast enough to swallow the sea, ancient enough to rival the gods, and powerful enough to decide whether the world lived or withered. Fire breathers, cloud riders, river coilers, guardians, destroyers, the dragon is older than any empire, older than most of the stories you already know. And if you trace them back far enough to the very beginning of myth, you find something surprising. The dragon wasn't born as a treasure-hoarding beast perched on a mountain. It was born as chaos itself. Long before China carved dragons on jade, long before Europe told stories of knights and scales and swords, the earliest storytellers in Mesopotamia pressed the first great serpent into wet clay. They called her Tiamat, not merely a creature, but the primordial sea itself. A mother of gods, a vast living ocean with the body of a serpent and the rage of a storm. In the ancient Enuma Elish, the young god Marduk steps forward to face her. Imagine it slowly, winds rising, seas shattering open, the sky bruising with thunder. Marduk casts a net across the chaos, summons storms so fierce that even a sea goddess must recoil. When Tiamat opens her enormous mouth to swallow him whole, the winds rush inside, pinning her open, and the arrow he looses pierces straight into her heart. And from her body he rebuilds the world. Her ribs become the sky's arch. Her lower half becomes the earth. Rivers flow from her eyes, mountains rise from her spine. Creation is not gentle. Creation is victory forged out of a slain serpent. And once you see this pattern, you see it everywhere. In the highlands of Anatolia, the Hittites told of a storm god robbed of his very eyes and heart by a serpent named Ilyanka. Imagine that, a deity stripped of sight and courage, the world thrown blind. Through cunning trickery and a feast laid by a goddess, the serpent is bound, dragged into the open and slain, but not without cost. Sometimes the god must sacrifice his own son to seal the victory. Order requires a terrible price. Along the Levantan coast, in the kingdom of Ugarit, the storm lord Baal clashes with a seven-headed sea serpent named Latan, the fleeing serpent, the twisting serpent. These words echo again later in the Hebrew scriptures, where Leviathan emerges as a cosmic sea dragon, impossible in scale, impossible in strength. Job describes it as a beast that breathes smoke, laughs at spears, and crushes iron as if it were straw. The message carved beneath the poetry is simple and chilling. The world is full of forces that humans cannot tame on their own. In Egypt, the story becomes a ritual repeated every night. While the world sleeps, the sun god sails through the dark river of the underworld, surrounded by shadows thick as sandstorms. There, the serpent Apep rises, a creature of pure darkness, fangs slick with the intention to swallow dawn itself. Priests wrote books of spells just to trample, stab, and burn wax effigies of this serpent, weakening him enough for sunrise to return. Carved on temple walls, the serpent Mehin coils protectively around the solar bark, shielding the god through the dangerous hours. Every night is a battle, every dawn is earned, but not all dragons were enemies. In Babylon, a different serpent appeared, the Mus letter 1e2b Us U, a composite beast painted in dazzling blue brick along the Ishtar Gate. It had the body of a serpent, lion's legs, eagle talons, and a horned head. Here, the dragon was no longer chaos. It had been tamed. It guarded. It served the god Marduk and stood proudly at the city's entrance, a sign that Babylon had mastered the wild and bent it to its order. That contrast, the same shape becoming chaos in one land and protection in another, reveals something deep about early cultures. A dragon could be the storm that destroys crops or the river that feeds them. It could be terror or wisdom or the living boundary between safety and the abyss. Persian tradition carried an even darker serpent. In the Avesta, the demon Ajay-Dahaka, later called Zahak, is a three-headed dragon who spreads drought and deceit. Later stories claim snakes grew from his shoulders after he was corrupted. He too is finally bound to a mountain, chained until the end of days. Across this region, victory over a dragon often means binding, not killing. The chaos can return. It must be chained, watched, and contained. And always beneath these stories is a truth whispered by river cultures. A serpent represents what humans fear most: flood, drought, plague, famine, invasion, collapse. Where modern people see weather maps and natural disasters, ancient people saw a single living shape, a monster that had to be fought. A river that arrives on time is a serpent restrained. A river that destroys homes is a serpent thrashing. These stories also trained people to understand leadership. A king was not simply a ruler. He was a serpent slayer, a binder of chaos, the one who kept the world turning in its proper rhythm. When Egyptians trampled the wax figure of Apep each dawn, they reaffirmed the pharaoh's power to hold the night at bay. When Babylon painted its dragon on the gate, it showed the world that chaos had been mastered and repurposed. Even the art became a silent argument. Cylinder seals carved with twisting serpents, reliefs etched with forked tongues and ridged backs, tombs painted with protective coils around the sun god's boat. Every image whispered the same thing: the world survives because the serpent has been placed in order, or chained, or defeated. But where did all these stories come from? Why did so many cultures, separated by oceans and mountains, imagine the same creature? A part of the answer is as simple as the earth beneath them. Great snakes are terrifying even to people who see them daily. Crocodiles lunging from murky rivers look like dragons rising from another world. The storm waves curl like living bodies. Lightning hisses before it cracks open the sky. A people who depend on seasonal floods and rain cycles do not need imagination to picture a monster. Nature sketches the outline for them every year. Another part of the answer lies buried in the soil. Across Asia, people uncovered enormous fossils, jawbones with teeth like daggers, ribs longer than their arms, and called them dragon bones. Apothecaries ground them for medicine. The farmers displayed them as omens. Before anyone knew the word dinosaur, the land itself whispered that huge creatures once roamed here, that giants once breathed. And the mind fills in the scales and smoke on its own. When you pull back and look at the earliest civilizations together, the pattern becomes unmistakable. Mesopotamia shapes creation from the corpse of a dragon. Egypt ritualizes the nightly battle to ensure dawn. Anatolia records the loss and recovery of divine sight taken by a serpent. Canaan pits its storm god against a seven-headed sea monster. Israel inherits the imagery and names the victory divine. Persia binds its dragon to prevent the end of days. Different lands, different languages, but the same truth. The serpent represents what must be conquered for life to continue. Before dragons guarded hordes or battled armored knights, they were something deeper, the embodiment of the world's most ancient problem. How do you turn danger into order? How do you make seasons predictable? How do you bring rain to dry soil and keep floods from swallowing a village whole? You find the serpent and you face it. The oldest storytellers did not leave the serpent in the dark. They gave its challenger a name, a weapon, a reason to fight. And though each culture changed the details, the bones of the story remain the same. The world is slipping into chaos and someone must restore it. In the hymns of the Rig Veda, the storm god Indra becomes that figure. Facing the dragon Vritra who withholds the waters and dries the land, Indra drinks the sacred draught, raises the thunderbolt, and shatters the serpent. Mountains split. Rivers roar back to life. Cattle run free. The people breathe again. Across the Iranian plateau, another champion rises Thritona to defeat the multi-headed Ajay. His victory frees the land from famine and lies. Like the others, the serpent is bound, not slain, kept far from the fragile rhythms of the seasons. And when you travel west, the thunderous battle echoes again. The storm king Baal clashing with the coiling, ocean-born Lotan along the coast of ancient Canaan, and the dragon's story continues. As you move deeper into these old landscapes of myth, the serpent grows more complex, more elaborate, more daunting. The tablets from Ugarit do not merely name Lotan, they frame him, as if carving the outline of a nightmare large enough to shadow the sea itself. The fleeing serpent, the twisting serpent, 7 heads rising like waves that refuse to break, 7 not simply a number but a symbol of fullness, of overwhelming force. A beast with 7 heads promises one thing. Even if you cut it down, chaos will find another mouth to speak through. So when the storm god splits those 7 heads, he is not winning a duel for prestige. He is proving something larger, that he can master a danger that renews itself, a chaos that returns again and again, season after season. Later, Israel's poets remember this shape. They fold it into their own hymns, the Lord shattering the heads of Leviathan in the waters, breaking the old serpent so the world can breathe again. Wherever these stories drift, the meaning stays the same. The monster is whatever rises against life. The Stormbringer is the one who forces it back down. Greece takes this ancient pattern and sets it among mountains and islands. Their dragons curl around sacred springs, groves thick with laurel, or treasures hidden in shadow. Zeus, lord of the open sky, battles Typhon, a serpent so vast and furious that fire pours from each of its heads. When the god hurls lightning, Typhon is crushed beneath the earth, buried under stone. And some say that the heat that shimmers from volcanic vents is not the breath of the world, but the body of Typhon still churning in the dark. Apollo finds another serpent, Python, coiled around a spring at Delphi. To plant his oracle there, he must clear the ground of the old monster. One arrow ends the serpent, and from that wound, a sanctuary grows, a clean place where questions rise and gods answer. Cadmus kills a serpent sacred to Ares, sows its teeth into the soil, and watches armed warriors erupt from the ground like seeds of iron. A violent metaphor, but an honest one. Some cities take root only through blood and the courage of those willing to stand their ground. And then there is Heracles in the marsh facing the Hydra, a beast that mocks strength. For every head he severs, 2 more writhe out of the stump. Only when his companion burns the necks shut does victory come. Greek stories do not hide difficulty. They do not flatter their heroes. They show fear, sweat, and the cleverness required to survive a night where the darkness thinks back at you. The lesson quietly tucked into every tale is simple. The serpent is cunning. The hero must be more so. The Hittites of Anatolia repeat the old pattern in a harsher light. Their storm god, proud and powerful, falls first. Ilyanka, the serpent, steals his eyes and heart, the symbols of sight and courage. The god is undone until a goddess intervenes, until a human hunter plays his part, until a trap is laid. In the feast that follows, the serpent is bound and slain, and balance returns, but not without sacrifice. The storm god's own son, married into the serpent's house, must die with the monster. The story feels older than triumph. It hums with realism. Order has a cost. A victory gained once can be gained again, but only if people stand together, holding the rope with steady hands. Egypt tightens the pattern into a rhythm, a clock that beats in darkness. Every night the sun boat sails through the black river of the underworld. And every night Apep rises from the deep to strike. Priests far from the river's mouth spit on wax serpents, stab them, burn them, grind their ashes, a daily rebellion against the dark. It is not a single triumph. It is a ritual of endurance. Because no single battle ever tames the world for good, every season has its serpent, every night holds its own river of shadows. And so, with the turning of the stars, the story is told again so the grain can be sown and the sun can rise. Across these lands, the pieces align like an old constellation. The serpent is long-bodied, often many-headed. It dwells in water or controls it. It hoards what should flow. The champion is a storm figure or someone who holds the storm's gifts: thunder, lightning, a spear sharpened like a bolt. When he triumphs, it is not just a monster that dies or is chained. A landscape is reborn. A river runs. A sky clears. A people finally breathe. This is not the victory of a hunter with a trophy. It is the survival of a village. The scholars call this a shared pattern, but you don't need scholarship to feel its truth. Neighbors borrow from neighbors. Travelers carry songs across mountains. A good story crosses deserts faster than a caravan. You hear of a serpent slain in a mountain pass, and suddenly you understand the river that bursts from a cliff after rain. But these stories are more than explanations for storms. They are lessons about leadership. The god who claims a throne must have slain or bound a serpent. A king who claims divine favor must echo that act in law, in justice, in the building of canals and storehouses. In Mesopotamia, kings carved irrigation channels and called them gifts of Marduk. In Egypt, the pharaoh's power was proven in the quiet work of maintaining temples, guarding calendars, and preparing for lean years. The hero is never a lone wanderer in these tales. He is an image of steady rule, of someone who keeps the land alive. If he fails, the serpent wins, and with it come famine, bandits, and despair. But myth carries a smaller truth too, one listeners feel even before the tale names it. The serpent can be a sickness, a heartbreak, a fear that wakes you just before dawn. The hero can be a parent who refuses to give up. A healer who knows when to heat the iron. Neighbors who tie a rope around a shared burden and pull until it moves. Myths do not survive only through priests. They survive because people see themselves in them. There is always a river that needs freeing. Always a wound that needs the right fire. Even after kingdoms fell, the story stayed alive. Perseus soars to a distant shore to find a princess chained to a rock as a sea monster rises from the deep. With a mirrored shield, he turns the impossible into stone. Jason sings a serpent to sleep so he and his crew can steal a fleece kissed by storms. Same pattern, different mask. The serpent guards what the world needs. The hero finds the one tactic that will work: hammer or song, blade or lullaby. In the north, the sagas take the shape and steep it in cold. The serpent becomes the world-coiling beast beneath the sea, feared even by gods. On another day, it is a dwarf-turned dragon coiled upon a hoard of gold. The hero might be a fisherman god straining on a line that bends the horizon, or a young warrior lying in a trench, waiting for the belly of a dragon to pass overhead. Different climate, different tone, same bones. The monster sits upon what the world needs: water, peace, wealth earned through long labor. And the hero bleeds so the world can breathe again. These tales were not bedtime stories whispered to children. They were warnings and reminders, proof that overwhelming forces can be faced, and reminders that they always return in new forms. The serpent of drought becomes the serpent of flood. The monster at the spring becomes the monster in the sky when plague travels on a fevered wind. The solution remains the same: a champion with the right tool, the right allies, the right patience. And myths remember something essential: the hero rarely wins alone. Even a god's thunderbolt must be forged by another hand. A warrior's sword stroke relies on the companion who seals the wound, the priest who keeps the night watch, the friend who stands ready with fire. The serpent is too large for any one person. Victory is a chain of hands. By the time empires rise, the pattern is already ancient. It flows into saints who ride horses, knights who wear steel, poets who imagine dragons speaking, singers who describe dragons burning. But beneath all the later ornaments lies the original truth: water should flow, the sun should rise, seeds should sprout. And anything that coils around those things must be challenged. A hero steps forward, thunder answers. And another season becomes possible. If you turn east, far past the deserts, beyond the mountains, the story shifts in tone but not in spirit. In China, the dragon emerges long before writing, in villages of jade carvers and sky watchers. Archaeologists have lifted from the soil small jade bodies curled like the soft bend of a crescent moon, heads raised, tails tucked. They call them pig dragons, but their curves whisper something older. They were buried with care 5,000 years ago, already sacred, already tied to the fate of the living and the dead. When writing first cut its lines into bone and bronze, the dragon's shape was already fixed in memory. On ritual vessels from the Shang and Zhou courts, you see spirals and masks, sinuous bodies twined in clouds, antlered heads, bearded jaws, eagle claws, catfish whiskers, carp scales. A creature made from the strongest parts of others, belonging to river, mountain, and sky all at once. In Chinese thought, the dragon is lord of water, rising with thunder, coiling in clouds, hiding in lakes and seas. Rains fall because dragons move. A good harvest means they are pleased. And so villages prayed to dragon kings. Magistrates burned incense when the fields cracked with drought. Farmers beat thunder drums and carried painted serpents through the streets. Coast women climbed temple steps with lamps to beg for calm seas. This wasn't superstition, it was survival. And in the capital, the emperor claimed a deeper connection: the mandate of heaven. He sat on the dragon throne, wore robes embroidered with waves and mountains and 9 coiling beasts chasing a glowing pearl. A symbol of wisdom, of thunder, of cosmic harmony. Only the emperor could wear 5-clawed dragons, others had to settle for 4. The law was exact, the message unmistakable. The closer a person stood to the Son of Heaven, the closer they stood to the dragon's breath, or so the old world believed. And if you walk through the forbidden city today, through the hush of its courtyards and the echo of your own footsteps on worn stone, you can still feel that belief pressing in from every direction. The dragons watch from the walls, 9 of them at a time, glazed in brilliant colors that catch the shifting light. Bridges arch over palace streams on the backs of stone turtles and carved bixi, guardians sometimes called the sons of dragons. A marble ramp leads toward the great halls, carved with more than 1,000 scales that ripple like frozen waves. Even the rooftops are armored with dragons, small ridged beasts crouched along golden tiles, their open jaws meant to frighten wandering spirits of fire away. And to live in that palace was to live under the surveillance of dragons. Their eyes followed you from pillars, from rooftops, from the curling incense smoke of ritual burners. They needed no words to speak their message. The emperor rules because heaven itself approves. And if the dragons fell silent, if flood or famine struck season after season, the meaning was equally clear. Heaven had turned its face away. Myths rose like smoke through this public world. One of the oldest tells of you the Great, who saved the land from a flood that swallowed valleys and villages for years. You did not try to block the water. He walked the land, studied its bends and curves, and carved new paths for the rivers with the help of a turtle spirit, and some say with dragons who carried earth in their claws. When the waters finally sank, fields returned, families rebuilt, and a dynasty began. Another tale says the Yellow Emperor shed his human form at death and rose to heaven as a dragon, not a monster of scales, but a spirit returning home to thunder and cloud. Other stories speak with softer breath. A simple farmer named Dong Fu learning the hearts of dragons and gaining their trust. A village tortoise growing so old and wise it transformed into a dragon. Each story, no matter its size, teaches the same quiet truth. Dragons favor those who align with the rhythm of the world. Lift your gaze from the palace tiles to the sky, and the dragon reigns there as well. The azure dragon of the east stands among the 4 celestial guardians, the white tiger of the west, the vermilion bird of the south, and the black tortoise of the north. The dragon commands spring, when new shoots break the soil and plows begin their slow, hopeful work. As astronomers traced the dragon's shape in the constellations, poets borrowed that image with ease. A warm wind is a dragon stirring in its sleep. A sudden storm is a dragon rolling over. The dragon of China is not a village-burning terror. It is rain, renewal, the pulse of good fortune moving through the earth. It flies without wings. It coils through the sky with whiskers streaming and jaws open toward the flaming pearl, the mystery that painters have pursued for centuries. One ancient master painted 9 dragons in ink so alive that their weight seems to crease the paper. On porcelain, dragons chase each other through waves and spirals of cloud. The carvers fit dragons onto roof beams and bridge ends where the water flows beneath. When a bell maker forged a temple bell, he crowned it with a dragon so that its echo would unfurl like a roar across the courtyard. Out in the streets and fields, the dragon is not only an image, it is motion, rhythm, sound. During the first moon of the year, men carry long dragons of silk and bamboo through narrow lanes. Lanterns glow inside the moving body. The head snaps and dips while drums thunder like approaching storms. Children run, shouting. Elders watch with hands tucked in their sleeves. The dance is a prayer, a way of calling the new year's luck awake. In the 5th month, rowers surge forward in long, slender boats carved with dragon heads. Drums crack the air to keep the oars unified, wood rising and falling like the beating heart of the river. The race honors a poet who died for integrity, but it also speaks to the river gods in the old language of motion and devotion. Bring rain when we need it, do not bring flood. The tradition grew its own constellation of smaller myths. People speak of the 9 sons of the dragon, not an official lineage, but a craftsman's shorthand. One son loves weight and crouches under steels, stone slabs carved with words. Another coils on roof ridges to watch for fire. Another clings to bells, loving their sound. Another bears fangs on doorknockers to ward off thieves. The lists changed by region and century because the purpose was never accuracy. It was intention. Carve this creature here and you invite this kind of protection. Even the ancient schools of philosophy left space for dragons. Scholars who studied the 5 phases placed the dragon in the realm of spring, growth, renewal, upward motion. The scholars who wrote about rulers and subjects used the dragon as a measure. A good ruler is a dragon who brings rain and clarity. A bad ruler is a dragon who thrashes in the lake and births sudden floods. A Confucian masters warned princes to deserve their dragons. Taoist adepts whispered tales of sages who, after long lives and deep understanding, rode dragons through storms as easily as walking through mist. The image was so powerful that foreigners adopted it too. Early travelers from the West wrote of the land of dragons, dazzled by the emperor's robes and the palace walls shining with scaled beasts. The dragon leapt from architecture and ritual into flags, coins, treaties. Some rebels chose other creatures to oppose dynasties, using symbols to challenge symbols. But even when an empire fell, the dragon remained in festivals, in carvings, in prayers whispered beside rivers at dusk. You cannot pull up a root that has braided itself through 5,000 years. Place the Chinese dragon beside its Western cousin and the differences reveal entire worlds. The Chinese dragon does not hoard gold, does not steal maidens, rarely breathes fire. It is long, wingless, yet it soars. It governs water. It shields villages. It is ancestor, emblem, patron. People pray to it in drought, thank it in harvest. The emperor wears it to claim harmony with heaven. The village mason chisels it into bridges so streams will flow kindly. It is an entire society speaking in one image, a map of water, fortune, and rightful rule. Another thread completes the tapestry, the phoenix, companion of the dragon. The two appear together in art, dragon for the emperor, phoenix for the empress. A balanced sky, a balanced earth. Harmony above ensures harmony below. When they appear together on palace walls or robes, the message flows wordlessly. If the heavens are in balance, so will be the seasons. Flood and drought still lurk in the background, but in these pairings, the old fear is softened into festival and pageant. So when you ask why China held the dragon for so long and so tightly, the answer becomes clear. The dragon stands at the crossing point of heaven and earth. It ties the mood of the sky to the grain in the granary. It binds the virtue of a ruler to the well-being of fields and villages. It carries the prayers of a farmer on a dry morning and the pride of a court that believes heaven is watching. And beyond all that, it is beautiful. A coiled body in mist, whiskers trembling, claws flexed toward a pearl that glows like condensed thunder. A creature that makes you believe the world is purposeful, alive, and ordered beneath the clouds. If the Chinese dragon is a cloud-bearer and a symbol of rule, the dragons of wider Asia form a great family with countless branches. Some guard, some teach, some must be met with steel or ritual, but all hold water and fortune in their coils. In lands shaped by monsoon and river, people learn to speak to them with offerings and song. Begin in India, where serpent beings called Nagas inhabit temple shrines and ancient epics. Their name can mean snake, spirit, or king of the deep. In the Mahabharata, the Naga Takshaka fells a king with venom, and the fire ritual that follows threatens to consume entire serpent clans. Another story tells of Kaliya, who poisons a river until Krishna dances on his writhing heads to drive him into the depths and make the water safe for cattle and children. A greater Naga, Shesha, lies coiled beneath the worlds, the endless one Ananta, with 1,000 hoods that spread like a canopy of living shadow. Vishnu rests upon him during the long cosmic sleep between creations. When gods and antigods churn the ocean of milk to draw out the nectar of immortality, they use the serpent Vasuki as their rope, each side pulling with divine force until mountains rise and sink and the world heaves with their efforts. These are not idle fantasies. They belong to a land that watches rivers swell from snowmelt and seeks harmony with waters that can give or destroy life. The Nagas are not always enemies. In Bengal, Manasa is honored as a serpent goddess of protection and fertility. In Buddhist lore, as the newly awakened Buddha sits beneath the tree, a storm gathers, and the Naga king Mukalinda rises from a lake, unfurling his many hoods to shelter him from wind and rain. Other stories speak of serpent kings who guard sacred scriptures beneath the water, releasing them only when a student is truly worthy. From India, serpent lore travels with monks and merchants. Across the old Khmer heartlands, stone Nagas stretch along causeways, their 7 or 9 heads fanned wide at the entrances to temples. At Angkor, entire avenues are railings of stone serpents, guarded by demons and gods who seem to churn them as if the city itself is reenacting the first cosmic sea. Khmer legends tell of a Naga princess who marries an Indian wanderer. Her father drinks back the floodwaters to reveal land for their kingdom, a reminder that rightful rule depends on peace with the spirits of water. Follow the Mekong and the Naga becomes a neighbor. In Laos and Thailand, river serpent shrines sit where the water bends. Boat races churn brown water under carved dragon prows. In northeast Thailand, villagers gather at the river's edge at the end of the rains, watching for red fireballs that rise from the surface, the Naga lights, signs that something ancient stirs below. Temple gates open as the jaws of serpents. Stairways curl as stone coils. Monks tell of a Naga who once sought ordination in human form, and in many monasteries, new novices wear serpent-patterned robes to honor that visitor from the deep. Turn farther east, and the dragon becomes the ancestor of a nation. Vietnam tells that the dragon lord L1E1C Long Quan took the immortal Ao Ko as his bride. She bore 100 children, half who followed her into the mountains, half who followed him to the sea, and from them a people began. From that ancient parting of mountain and sea, Vietnam traces its beginning. The memory lingers not only in stories but in names carved into the land itself. Later dynasties chose the dragon to anchor their capitals, shaping the dream into the very syllables of their cities. Thang Long, Rising Dragon, was the old name of Hanoi. Walk its older quarters or the ruins beneath them, and you can still find the soft-faced dragon curling across roof tiles, jaws open toward a flaming pearl, its long body flowing like river water captured in clay. A court ritual once governed who could carve or wear the dragon, just as in China. But in the villages, the creature never belonged to palaces alone. Farmers, potters, and woodcarvers kept it as a language of their own, a way to speak about the rivers that swell without warning, the fields that green after the rains, the life that depends upon the right relationship between water and earth. Sail the long arcs of islands to the south, and another branch of the serpent line rises. In Java and Bali, the Nagas, Basuki, and Antiboga coil deep in the old dances and carvings. They brace the earth itself, winding at the roots of sacred mountains. Temple stairways rise between their stone bodies, the wide hooded heads lifted like guardians who never sleep. In festival season, dancers retell the ancient churning of the cosmic ocean, a ritual of motion meant to call the right kind of rain. The rhythm echoes through fields where farmers look to the sky and hope their work will not be washed away. Across the sea in the Philippines, the serpent takes a fiercer shape. The Bacanawa is said to rise from the deep to swallow the moon. When the shadow bites into that bright circle, villagers beat pots, shout, and send fire into the sky to drive the monster back. The explanation is myth, but the emotion is real, a coastal people feeling the breath of the sea in their bones. In Borneo, the Dayak carve a creature they call a serpentine in body, sharp as a dog's bite curling around the edges of shields. These dragons belong to the boundary between worlds, water and wood, storm and forest, village and wild. Climb north into the mountains and the dragon becomes thunder itself. Bhutan names itself the land of the thunder dragon. Its flag carries a white-scaled beast stretched across gold and orange, claws grasping jewels that stand for prosperity and speech. The roar that follows lightning rolling off high Himalayan peaks is said to be the dragon's voice. Monasteries of the Drukpa school bear the same emblem, carved, painted, whispered in chants that echo through cold stone halls. In Tibet, the dragon shares its domain with snow lions and wind horses. Buddhist paintings place Nagas among the spirits stored beneath temple floors, guardians of water and treasure. If they are content, springs run clear and beams of wood remain unrotted. If they grow angry, storms rise without warning. Korea weaves yet another thread into the tapestry, a dragon born not of birth but of aspiration. Folklore speaks of the Imugi, a great serpent that longs to ascend into true draconic form. If it endures centuries and captures a glowing pearl fallen from the heavens, it rises at last into the clouds as a yang, a rain-bringer, river lord, a cousin to the Chinese long. Artists draw the shining pearl in its grasp, a symbol of transformation earned through patience and virtue. Royal planners of the Joseon court built their palaces beside still ponds, crossed by delicate bridges carved like dragon backs. The rules of the realm extended even into iconography. The number of claws a dragon could wear on a robe marked rank, just as water rituals marked a king's legitimacy. But farmers kept their own dragons carved into millstones, painted on jars, prayed to when a season began too dry. For the court, the dragon meant dignity. For the village, it meant hope. Across the straits to Japan, and the dragon takes yet another form, one shaped by storm, sea, and shrine. The creature is called Ryu or Tatsu, long-bodied, wingless, yet sovereign over the skies. It flies through cloud without effort. It calls down rain when rice fields thirst. It crouches as a fountain spout at temple gates, letting clear water fall into the hands of worshippers who purify themselves before they approach the sacred. Old stories say a palace lies beneath the ocean, ruled by the sea god Ryujin. There he keeps tied jewels and treasures that can summon the sea inward or push it outward. A fisherman named Urashima Taro once visited that palace, married a princess, and lived what felt like days in a place of shimmering coral halls. When he returned to his village, centuries had passed. The time itself moves differently beneath the waves. Other tales place the dragon before heroes. The storm-born god Susanoo comes upon an old couple and their daughter crying beside a river. An 8-headed serpent will return to devour the girl. Susanoo brews sake so strong it could topple mountains and feeds it to each head. When the monster sleeps, he strikes, cutting the serpent apart. In its tail, he finds a blade of uncanny beauty. That sword, Kusanagi, becomes one of the 3 sacred treasures of the imperial regalia. The teaching is familiar but spoken in a Japanese voice. Strength matters, but planning matters more. From the ruin of the serpent comes a gift that shapes a dynasty. As Buddhism flowed from India through Central Asia into China, Korea, and Japan, it carried the image of the Naga like a golden thread. The temples everywhere tell of serpent guardians who protect sacred springs, bring rain to parched fields, or demand peace from builders before foundations can be laid. When an earthquake collapsed a pagoda, chronicles sometimes wrote that the Naga beneath had shifted and must be appeased, perhaps with a change in the footing stones, perhaps with a ritual of light and song. A practical engineering and myth blended without conflict. A builder did what worked, then thanked the spirit that allowed it. Step back from the details, and a wider pattern rises like mist from a river. Across Asia, dragons and nagas are tied to water, to monsoon, river, spring, and sea. They give a face to the rains that bring life and the floods that steal it. Courts adopted them as emblems because a ruler's worth was judged by canals, dikes, and granaries. Villages honored them because a family's survival depended on the right rains at the right time. Where the serpent threatens, a saint or hero rises. Where it protects, a wise hand brings offerings, patience, and restraint. You can feel this living thread in the quiet moments of daily life. A child runs under a silk dragon at New Year in a Korean harbor, learning that the sea is powerful but can be befriended. Rowers lean forward in narrow boats while a monk shakes a bronze bell shaped like a dragon's head, praying for a kind season. In Bali, a stone carver cuts scales into the stairway of a temple where villagers leave fruit and hopes for healing. In Japan, a traveler takes water in his cupped hands from a dragon fountain, rinses his mouth, and ties a small wish to a branch that stirs in the wind. These acts speak without a book. We live alongside forces larger than ourselves. We can honor them, and when they turn wild, we must be ready. Taken together, these dragons across Asia feel like a single river with many bends. They do not hoard gold. They do not lurk in caves counting treasure. They are not trophies for wandering heroes. They are neighbors, protectors, challengers. They make rulers honest. They make builders deliberate. They make farmers humble. They make storytellers brave. When Greek poets later used the word draken, they meant a serpent whose gaze never sleeps, a watcher. And across the world, these watchers guard what matters. Springs that feed cities, trees with golden fruit, the fleece that kings would risk kingdoms to possess. Whoever seeks those things must face what coils around them. Delphi remembers this truth best. Before Apollo claimed the valley, the spring belonged to Earth herself. Typhon, a great serpent, guarded it. When the god arrived, he loosed his arrows and carved out a new order. The oracle that rose there still carries the serpent's memory in its name, Pythia, the one who speaks where a dragon once lay rotting beneath the sun. In Thebes, another serpent's death becomes the seed of a civilization. Cadmus follows a wandering cow to choose the site of a city. When his men are killed by the serpent of Ares, Cadmus faces the beast alone. After it falls, he sows its teeth into the ground. Armed warriors rise from the soil and battle one another until only 5 survive. These 5 become the founders of noble houses, a proof that even the death of a dragon demands repayment. Cadmus must serve Ares for years to settle the blood he spilled. Even Heracles learns that some monsters cannot be beaten by strength alone. In the marshes of Lerna, the Hydra waits in foul water. Cut 1 head and 2 rise. Only with the help of his nephew Iolaus does Heracles find the rhythm, cut, burn, move. The last head cannot be killed, only crushed beneath stone. He dips his arrows in the Hydra's blood, carrying its poison with him for the rest of his life. Victory leaves scars that follow him home. To the west, in a grove touched by sunset, golden apples shine among dark leaves. Ladon coils around the tree, never sleeping. Heracles must take the apples, but the stories disagree on how. Sometimes he kills the dragon, other times he tricks Atlas into retrieving the fruit. In either telling, a serpent guards what glitters like the sun, and a hero must choose between violence and cunning. Across the Black Sea, and the tale repeats in a new shape. In Colchis, the golden fleece hangs in the grove of Ares, guarded by a sleepless dragon. Jason cannot defeat it by force. Medea, gifted in herbs and spells, lulls the creature into stillness with song and smoke. Jason takes the fleece and runs. The dragon survives, the price is paid later in heartbreak and betrayal. And so the old pattern continues. What the world needs is always guarded by something that watches. Greek myth does not lock its serpents in deep caves or leave them coiled around forgotten trees. Sometimes they rise from the sea itself, immense shapes called up when a king boasts too loudly, or a city forgets its place beneath the sky. The word the old storytellers used was kidos, a creature of the deep whose presence meant that something had gone terribly wrong. Along the coast of Ethiopia, when the gods turn their faces away, Andromeda is chained to a rock as an offering to the dark water. Beneath her, the sea stirs in long, hungry shadows. Perseus drifts overhead, the head of Medusa wrapped in a sack at his side. One glance, one moment, and the serpent becomes stone, frozen forever in the shape of its rising. Another time, an insult rolls out from Troy, and the sea answers with a monster of its own. It tears through the surf until Heracles arrives and drags a royal daughter, Hesione, from its jaws. These creatures are not guardians of treasure or trees. They are the voices of the sea and its gods, reminders that water is older than cities and far less patient. Beyond these coastal storms lies Typhon, the breaker of skies. He is no spring serpent or grove watcher. He rises against the heavens themselves. Later poets imagine him with 100 blazing heads, each pouring fire. Zeus meets him with lightning, and the struggle throws mountains into darkness. Some say Typhon lies under Mount Etna now, and every roar of the volcano is the breath of a fallen enemy shifting in his sleep. The message is quiet but unmistakable. Even victories written in lightning are never fully still. In the earliest Greek poems, the word draken simply means snake, but the essence of the later dragon is already forming. On the march to Troy, a serpent climbs a tree and devours a clutch of birds. A seer counts the wings, the tails, the motion of the beast, and predicts the length of the war. Shields gleam with coils. City walls rise like the back of some stone serpent. Even when the creature is small, the imagination around it is large. Rome inherits these serpents with a soldier's discipline and a naturalist's curiosity. Pliny the Elder writes of dragons that crush elephants and serpents so vast they drink rivers into silence. Most of it is exaggeration, but not all of it feels impossible. Romans treated dragons as part of the world's far edges, dangerous but real enough to place in a scholar's book. And Rome does something else. It gives the dragon a sound. When Roman legions faced the Dacians on the Danube, they saw warriors carrying a standard shaped like a dragon. The head was metal, jaws open wide. The body was long cloth that streamed behind it. When the cavalry charged, the wind rushed into the mouth, making the dragon ripple and scream. The Romans took the idea at once. Soon their own mounted troops carried the Draco, and emperors stamped it onto coins. In late Roman carvings, the dragon windsock snaps above soldiers, a serpent of air and motion. The sea, too, remained a place of serpents. In Virgil's tale, two great dragons rise from the surf and crush the priest Laocoon and his sons. He had urged Troy to reject the wooden horse. The gods silence him with coils and terror. A sculptor later carved the scene so vividly that every muscle, every twist of the serpent seems to writhe in stone. Greek art preserves these animals just as strongly as poetry. On vases, Apollo stands over Python's fallen body. Heracles leans into the Hydra's coils, his companions torch searing wound after wound. Jason slips from the jaws of the sleepless dragon of Colchis. Every image repeats the same truth: long bodies, sleepless eyes, guardianship, vigilance. The dragon is a watcher. The draken in Greek and Roman thought guards what must not be casually touched: a spring that keeps a city alive, a tree that bears gold, a fleece bright as dawn. It stands at the threshold of the sacred and makes the hero earn his way through. Song can lull it, herbs can weaken it, iron alone often fails. The city that rises afterward carries the memory of the serpent, a water source no one neglects, a house that claims descent from teeth sown into earth long ago. Rome leaves one final gift to the medieval world: plausibility. Because Romans wrote of dragons as if they simply lived far away, because they carried dragon standards into battle, because their scholars catalogued serpents as part of the world, later centuries inherited not only myth but expectation. Something like a dragon, people thought, might live just beyond the next ridge. And so, as the map expands north and the world grows colder, the serpent grows with it. Wider, older, patient, ready to coil through forests and winter shadows. When the dragon wakes, it wakes because something is missing: a single cup disturbed, a single coin taken from the silence it has guarded for generations. That small theft opens an ache inside its hoard, and the creature rises like a storm, remembering its hunger. By night it goes out across the fields. Fire spills from its jaws, rolling over thatched roofs and folded farms. The sky stains red. Beowulf hears the news and gathers the few men who will stand beside him. They walk toward the barrow, that old mound of earth and stone where the dragon sleeps among its gold. At the doorway, most of the warriors falter. Their courage breaks like frost under sunlight. Only Wiglaf, young and untested, rushes forward with his king. The dragon pours through the mouth of the cave like a living wind. Beowulf's shield melts in its flame. He swings his sword and the blade snaps. Heat devours the air. Wiglaf does not run. He plunges his sword into the tender place beneath the wing. Beowulf finds a dagger, forces himself upward through the smoke, and cuts the great throat open. The fire gutters out. The cave grows quiet. Gold glimmers in the dark, ringing faintly like distant bells. Beowulf sinks against the wall. He asks to see the treasure, not to keep, but to know he has won it for his people. Wiglaf brings him the shining pieces. The dying king thanks God, unclasps his golden collar, and places it in Wiglaf's hands. Smoke drifts across the chamber. Coins reflect their last breaths of light. There, among the treasure, Beowulf speaks his final words and dies. His people build a barrow on a sea cliff and burn him on a pyre. They bury the treasure with him. A woman's voice rises over the wind, a dirge that speaks of enemies approaching over the waves. The poem remembers the dragon lying dead by the stone wall. Its long vigil ended after winters without number. But what lingers is not the corpse. It is the knowledge that gold left too long in the dark gathers a strange power, and that such wealth always calls for a king willing to die setting it free. Across the north, smaller worms rise in ballads and hearthside whispers. The lambton worm begins in carelessness. A young lord skips church to fish. He hooks a pale, eel-like thing with eyes that feel wrong. Unnerved, he throws it into a well and goes off to war. The creature grows in the dark. When it emerges, it coils around a hill, devours cattle, and knocks down stone walls. The young lord returns to a land in ruin. A wise woman tells him he must wear armor studded with blades and fight the worm in the river, where the current will carry away the pieces. He does so. The creature wraps him, cuts itself on the knives, and dies. But the curse he vowed to break required him to kill the first living thing he saw after the victory. He cannot do it. From that day on, his house withers, a family living under the weight of a broken promise. Farther north coils the linton worm, its mouth large enough to swallow a cow, its body dragging through the soil like a plow. A knight named Somerville heats a spear wrapped in pitch and hemp, rides to the cave, and thrusts the burning weapon into its throat. Smoke fills the chamber. The worm bursts apart. Its death leaves the stones blackened for a generation. At the world's edge curls the great store worm, so vast its coils form the horizon. It demands a princess every week. The people tremble until a quiet boy steals a boat, enters the creature's open mouth, and cuts out the liver. He lights it with a smoldering coal carried from home. The beast thrashes, dies, and its teeth fall into the sea, becoming the Orkney and Shetland Islands. These stories taste of peat, tide, and cold wind. They remind listeners that a monster may swallow a shore, but nerve, luck, and a flame in the dark can hollow it from within. The North carved its dragons as much as it sang them. In Norway, stave churches rise like wooden forests, their beams ending in dragon heads that bite the air above the eaves. Slim serpents twist along the timbers, their bodies knotting together, reminding worshippers that the old world serpent still coils beneath every village. On runestones, the very letters travel the back of a dragon, the script winding across the serpentine body like a living sentence. Touching the stone feels like touching a creature that carries memory in its spine. Longships cut through fjords with carved dragon heads on their prows, glaring at distant shores. Old Icelandic law forbids bringing the dragon head into harbor, for fear the land spirits might take offense. It is a glimpse into the northern mind. A warrior sign at sea becomes a gesture of respect when sailing home. Force in one place becomes humility in another. Gold burns beneath all these tales, gold hoarded, gold buried, gold lost. The north is filled with hordes sealed in bogs, sunken in mounds, hidden for gods or guarded for warriors who never returned. When later generations dig up arm rings, cups, and bosses from black soil, they understand why storytellers imagined sleeping beasts. A barrow facing the sea invites a story. It is easy to believe something scaled lies inside, counting in silence. So poets shaped a rule. A dragon loves gold because gold never changes, never judges, never leaves, it simply shines. The dragon's greed is the final echo of human greed. As time moves toward the High Middle Ages, the dragon becomes sharper, more symbolic. In Old Norse songs, it is simply a danger, a fact of life. But in later English poems, it becomes a reflection of kingship, the risks of ruling, the temptation to sit on wealth while the world burns outside the hall. In ballads, the worm becomes a curse, sometimes a punished sin, sometimes a tormented soul. From all these tales emerge the dragon shapes that later writers hammer into place. A creature buried under earth, guarding a hoard. A beast that flies, burning fields when a single cup goes missing. A serpent that speaks, its intelligence cold as iron. A boy with a brave edge in hand, an old king with a broken sword, a barrow pounded by winter seas, a ring that brings ruin to every hand that wears it. These stories come from soil and fear and long memory. They come from people who buried their dead with treasure, who lost livestock to unseen teeth, who saw friendships twist under the weight of gold. And still, the older serpents remain. Jörmungandr waits at the world's edge for the last day when it will rise to face Thor. Thor will kill it, and then take 9 steps before falling dead from venom. Níðhöggr gnaws at the root of the world tree and rises in the world's final hour, flying over corpses. These are reminders that even the strongest blows only delay the turning of the wheel. But the stories that endure, the stories that shape every dragon after, are simpler. A man, a mound, a gleaming edge of steel. Those tales lie behind every later dragon coiled atop treasure, behind every poetic name for gold, Fafnir's bed, the fire of the hoard, the sleeping wealth. This is the dragon shape that enters the next age. It meets saints on horseback and knights in mail. It grows wings, it burns, it keeps its love of treasure and its gift for watchfulness. It tests courage and the soul behind it. When the old gods faded and church bells began to toll the hours, the dragon did not disappear. It moved. It slipped from sacred springs to village squares. It perched on church walls, priests preached of it. Painters set it under the hooves of saints. Children watched festival plays where a scaled creature spat smoke and a holy rider pushed it back with a lance. In this new world, the dragon became more than a beast. It became a lesson with claws. Most begin with St. George, the soldier saint whose legend flowed from eastern deserts to English rain. Early writings say he died for his faith. Later storytellers gave him armor, a white horse, and a city in despair. In the Golden Legend, a dragon poisons a marsh near Silene. The people feed it sheep. When sheep fail, they bind children to stakes by the shore. At last they send the king's daughter, dressed for sacrifice, standing alone by the water. George rides in as if from another realm. He makes the sign of the cross. He levels his lance. He charges. The blow is true. The dragon thrashes. George tells the princess to cast her sash. She loops it around the wounded creature's neck, and it follows her like a trained hound through the city gates. The people tremble. Only after they accept the saint's call to faith does he slay the monster quietly, cleanly. The tale teaches that courage alone is not enough, something higher must sanctify it. His banner, the red cross on white, travels with crusaders. His name becomes a cry in battle. Guilds take him as patron. Artists paint him with a serene face, a gleaming spear, and a dragon pinned at its tip. You can stand before an Italian fresco and feel the moment of impact, the hush before salvation. Other saints bear serpents differently. Saint Margaret of Antioch is swallowed whole by a dragon in prison. She lifts a wooden cross. It tears the beast open from within and she steps out untouched. Her image becomes a symbol of deliverance and a comfort to women in childbirth. Saint Martha meets the Tarasque along the Rhone. Fishermen curse the creature for crushing boats. Soldiers cannot kill it. Martha sprinkles holy water, sings a psalm, and the monster grows calm, allowing her to lead it into the town on a simple cord. The townsfolk panic and strike it down. Martha forgives them. Unto this day, Tarascon drags a wooden beast through the streets in remembrance. The wooden beast of Tarascon rolls through the streets as drums pound and children run. But beneath the laughter lies an older memory, a dragon quieted not by steel but by a hymn. Along the Seine, another story settled into the marshes and would not leave. The people of Rouen spoke of a creature they called the gargoyle, something that lurked by the river's bend, overturning boats, filling the sky with smoke so thick it stained the air. Saint Romain went out to face it, not with a spear, but with prayer and a single volunteer from the town. He slipped his stole around the dragon's neck as if it were a bridle, and led it back along the riverbank like a dangerous horse finally answering the hand. The townspeople burned the beast, but they kept its head as both warning and charm. Masons remembered the tale. They carved dragon faces along the edges of cathedral roofs, gargoyles they called them. When the rain comes, water pours from their mouths, flung away from the stone saints and colored windows. A creature that once choked the sky with foul breath now spits clean rain from the house of God. It is a small victory, but it is written in stone high over every passerby. Across the sea in the old Celtic lands, the saints and dragons speak in a lower voice. A Breton story says that St. Caranog came to a village near an estuary, where a dragon haunted the river and frightened cattle from the water. The saint set his altar stone on the ground and began to say Mass. When he finished, he lifted the stone as easily as if it were a folded cloak and walked down to the shore. He held his stole out like a leash. The dragon bowed its head and followed. The king who watched this gave land for a church and kept his word. Here there is no clash of weapons, no burst of flame, only a quiet command and order restored. The river goes back to its course. The pasture returns to the cattle. Faith in these stories is not an escape from the world, but a pattern that keeps each thing in its proper place. Over all of these tales stands Michael, the archangel, the church's great dragon slayer. In the book of Revelation, he fights the ancient serpent, casting it down from heaven. Painters arm him with shield and spear and place a scaled body writhing under his feet. Sometimes they show him weighing souls on a narrow balance while a clawed hand reaches up to tip the scale. The message is not subtle. As long as Michael stands, evil will not win the last word. Shrines to him rise on lonely heights, islands that drown in tide, mountains that touch the sky. Pilgrims climb stairways in fog and thin air to kneel at small altars that look out over earth and cloud. On some carvings, the dragon at his ankle is only a small coil of scales and teeth, barely noticeable. But everyone knows what it stands for. the old enemy kept under a heel that does not tremble. For the people of those centuries, dragons were not tucked away with unicorns as harmless decorations. They lived at the edge of belief and geography. Bestiaries listed dragons as the greatest of serpents. Isidore of Seville wrote that they loved caves and fled from the smell of crushed laurel. Travelers returned from Egypt and the Levant with crocodile skins and hung them in churches as trophies of dragons slain in foreign lands. When whales washed ashore, their ribs and jawbones were mounted as relics of monsters from the deep. Apothecaries sold fossil shark teeth as dragons' tongues, to be ground up and worn against poison. A scholar can smile at this now. As a farmer watching a black tide seep into the reeds did not. He walked past a church porch, saw a huge jaw hanging over the door, and felt for a moment that someone had killed the thing he feared. Preachers took that creature and made it a map of the soul. The coils of the dragon became pride, envy, bitterness wound around itself. Its breath stood for slander and plague, words and winds that could lay a village low. The hoard in its cave was the wealth a rich man held back while his neighbors grew thin. In stained glass, you might see a dragon crouched at the base of a well. Above it, a saint raises 2 fingers in blessing. Clear water arcs into a bucket. Is anyone who pauses beneath that window can read the lesson without letters? If the well is to run sweet, someone must stand between the people and whatever poisons their source of life. The parish took that lesson and turned it into theater. On St. George's Day, some towns built dragons from canvas and ash rods, with a man inside pulling a cord to snap the jaws. The creature wove through the crowds. Children shrieked, half in fear, half in delight. A girl in white, the princess, walked beside with a bright ribbon for a leash. When the knight's spear struck, smoke billowed from the dragon's mouth. Drums rattled like distant thunder. Then the whole procession wound to the church for blessing and feast. As it was not a mockery of belief. It was belief put into motion, something the timid and the bold alike could step into for an afternoon before returning to their ordinary fears. Stone and wood repeated the sermon in every detail. Above cathedral doors, tympana showed saints calmly planted while dragons crawled at their hems, teeth bared and futile. Column capitals twisted with scales that melted into vines and leaves, as if the wild thing of chaos had been woven into the order of creation at last. The pulpits bore carvings of George or Michael, so that every spoken sermon rose out of a base, already preaching a wordless homily on steadfastness. A man or woman who could not read an alphabet could still read that. When plague rolled through the streets and bells did not stop tolling, processions formed. Relics, candles, icons, and sometimes a dragon. Wooden beasts were hauled out of town and into the fields, as if pestilence itself were being dragged beyond the walls. That gesture, older than any church tower, was not despised. A priest who had buried a dozen people in 1 week used every symbol, every story that might hold a cracked community together. If pulling a wooden serpent past the well bought 1 night of rest and 1 morning of courage, it was holy work. In this medieval world, the dragon lived with 2 faces. One was the beast in the marsh, the thing that might burn hayricks or snatch sheep in the dark and make winter harder than it had to be. The other was the devil in a sermon, the whisper of temptation, the sickness no herb could mend. Often they were the same. People feared not just monsters, but years when the harvest failed or a fever took their children. The tales of saints and dragons did not deny that fear. They turned it into a picture of someone, anyone, who stood between terror and the village and did not step aside. Sometimes that guardian fought. Sometimes they spoke and the dragon obeyed. Sometimes they simply bandaged a wound or blessed a well. The rhythm of those tales matched the rhythm of a parish year: feast, famine, flood, disease, recovery, and the sense that the world was always close to going wrong. The change from ancient dragon to medieval dragon is not a clean break. The creature still coils near water, still haunts caves and crossroads, still rises from the sea to trouble ships. What changed was the tool believed to hold it back. Where the old gods carried thunderbolts and spears, the saints carried rights, patience, and the sign of the cross. Where old kings sewed serpent teeth to raise a city, bishops raised fonts and altars and taught people to endure. The dragon became a teacher of peril, yes, but also of hope. By the height of the Middle Ages, the dragon was everywhere. It spat rain from stone mouths on cathedral roofs. It twisted along the margins of bestiaries beside neat Latin lines warning of its stare. It curled under Michael's feet on rude screens. It lumbered through village pageants, belching smoke and laughter. It hung as a dried crocodile from a church beam, the ghost of a distant river. It lay, in stories, in the mouth of a cave outside a village, waiting in the dark while wind moaned through trees. The dragon had become a shared word, a way to point at anything that threatened the community and to imagine facing it together. All of this prepared the path for a new kind of tale. The saints were not the only ones standing between villages and beasts. Knights, squires, shepherds, and blacksmiths began to step into the stories, carrying not relics but iron and cunning. Their legends are leaner, rougher. They speak as much to hunger in the stomach as to worry in the soul. They also give the dragon its next familiar shape: wide wings, scorching breath, and a love of gold that burns the hearts of those who covet it. Once prayer had shown that a monster might be turned, the lay world replied, "What happens if we meet it with steel and a plan?" That answer will shape the dragons that rule the rest of the Middle Ages and echo into every winged, fire-breathing monster that roosts in stories today. By the time you reach the river cities, the dragon stands with one foot in story and one in stone. In Krakow, they still speak of the creature under Wall Hill, the dragon in the cave beneath the castle, the one that came up at night to drag cattle from the fields along the Vistula. Knights went against it in bright armor and came back in pieces or not at all. It was not a knight who solved the problem. It was a cobbler's apprentice. He thought like a man who knows leather and fire. He stuffed a calfskin with sulfur and pitch, stitched it shut, and left it just outside the cave mouth. The dragon, greedy and unworried, swallowed the bait in a single gulp. Thirst caught it by the throat. It lurched to the river and drank until its belly split and its story ended on the stones. The town gave thanks. Somewhere in neat script, someone wrote down the apprentice's name. If you stand there now, on the bank where the river runs black in the evening, you can look up at the castle and down at a bronze dragon that breathes fire on a schedule for children. The old trick has become a clock. The warmth on your face is a faint echo of the heat that once split a monster open. Further west, the French chansons and the English romances carry the same work into halls lit by candles and colored glass. They drape it in silk and trumpet calls, but the shape is familiar. Sir Bevis of Hampton is cast out from his home, grows into his strength in foreign lands, and returns with a sword named Morglay. He cuts down a dragon near Southampton that has been burning peasants where they stand in their own furrows. Guy of Warwick, swollen with pride, lays aside his honors, goes on pilgrimage until he is thin as a staff, then comes back to find his country troubled. He fights a dragon near Northumberland, a giant, a bull-like beast as large as a barn. The geography drifts, the details swell, but the poems do one honest thing. They take a lord out of his hall and put him alone on the road, or with one friend at his side, facing the damage his land has suffered. A great house, these stories say, is not a wall against monsters. It is a place you must be willing to leave, with a spear in your hand and a promise on your tongue. Turn east and the songs grow harsher, like iron clanging in frost. In the Bailey of Ruse, Dobrynya Nikitich is warned by his mother never to bathe in a certain river and never to step on a certain stone. So of course he does both. It is the way young warriors test the edge of the world. The water boils. Zime Gorinich, a three-headed dragon, rises from the river with steam in its teeth. They fight for 3 days. Dobrynya stands in scalding streams. The dragon's wings beat clouds into shreds. He drives the beast toward a stone at the crossroads, the Puchai stone, where roads meet, and they say the visible and the invisible scrape against one another. There he shears off 3 heads, and 3 more when the dragon's wives come howling to join the fray. In other tellings, he frees a princess pinched in the dragon's claws, and a city learns to breathe again. The battles feel like winters that refuse to end until someone is willing to spend his whole body bringing the thaw. Walk back west to the border hills where England leans against Wales. On the downs, a white horse is cut into the chalk, and below it a low rise bears the name Dragon Hill. The soil on its crown is bare. People say grass will not grow where a dragon's blood once soaked in. The story that sits on that scar is simple and old. A knight with a red cross on his shield fights a serpent whose hiss carries across the ridges. From a distance, you would see little more than a line of men on the slope and a banner working in the wind, but the memory lives like a footprint in the earth. The wound that saved a village never quite heals. Behind the banners and sermons, these tales have a craftsman's eye. They linger on gear because in the dark, gear is what stands between breath and the next moment. The knight does not simply ride forth. He pulls a padded gambeson tight under his mail so that a blow that does not pierce will not shatter every bone in his chest. He straps on a shield faced with rawhide shrunken taut so it will not split on the first impact. He carries a long ash spear with an iron shoe on the butt so it will not splinter when he braces it in the soil, and lets the weight of a charging thing run itself onto the point. If he has time, he digs, lies in a trench with his spear angled up. The old, hard tactic that gives one man a chance against pure weight and scales. If the dragon breathes fire, he soaks his cloak and throws it over the head for a single blind heartbeat. If it spits venom, he chooses wind at his back and ties a wine-soaked cloth over his mouth, more for courage than for medicine. Pitch and tow on spearheads because fire moves faster than a man's step. Lime dust to blind. Caltrops to lame. Bells to startle. Dogs to mark where something passes in the reeds at night. In the song, the hero may ride in as if born with a shining blade. In the village where the song was first told, everyone knew he also carried a sack of tricks and every favor he could ask. The battlefields repeat themselves like dreams. A fouled spring that must run clear again, a narrow bridge where one fighter can hold a beast that cannot shrink itself, a hollow lane perfect for ambush, a cave mouth that frames the head so that a thrust might find the place between scales. There is a stubborn faith in the belly strike. From Sigurd lying in the trench under Fafnir's path to the archer who finds the soft place beneath a wing in Beowulf's barrow, the stories insist that every wall of armor has a seam. The seam exists to reward patience, nerve, and the kind of mind that studies a monster before it charges. Many of these dragons lie on treasure as if it were a bed they cannot leave. When the knight stands in the emptied cave, the air sounds different. Light rings off metal, cups lean against bosses and blades, coins lie in drifts like fallen leaves that will never rot. The only sound is the faint chime gold makes when a foot shifts its weight. It is a dangerous silence. The poems know this. They are careful to have the hero call others into the cave so that many eyes see the hoard. Or they send that treasure back under the earth with a dead king and a warning. A hoard that sleeps in the dark will invite another worm. A hoard that passes through open hands to become bridges, walls, and bread will not. The dragon, without meaning to, preaches thrift and duty as sternly as any pulpit. These stories also make room for courage that wears no crown. A cobbler tricks a dragon with sulfur sewn into skin. A farmer straps knives to his coat and steps into a river, trusting the current to carry away the pieces he makes. A border rider realizes that a burning spear thrust into a mouth is better than the cleanest cut at a neck. The ballads keep the names of these people and the names of their hills and streams. They honor the one who brought the tool that fit the work. Sometimes custom turns that honor into law. When a new bishop of Durham crossed the Tees, local folk met him with a heavy sword said to have killed the sockburn worm. He, in return, confirmed their liberties. The gesture said what no proclamation needed to spell out. The steel of a commoner and the seal of a churchman both hold back dragons of different kinds. Art moves alongside the tales, fixing them where eyes cannot ignore them. The stone carvers lay dragons under the feet of knights on their tombs so that in death, as in story, they stand on a mastered terror. Wall painters give secular slayers the same calm faces they give to saints. Heralds paint dragons on shields not only to frighten enemies, but to remember that once, in some neglected year, someone from that house held the line for a river town no one else was watching. The dragon carved on a church cornice spitting rain can be read as a demon pinned in place. The dragon painted on a shield can be read as a promise. When the bell sounds at noon, someone from this line will go. For all the steel and swagger, the stories never forget the old rule. No one wins alone. A wife brings the torch at the one heartbeat when heat will make the cut final. A smith sets a rivet that will not shear when weight comes down. A wise woman tells a boy to fight in the current so the river joins his side. The victory, when it comes, belongs to more than the name in the song. The worst endings belong to the proud man who rides out alone because he wants the glory without the counsel. The dragon gives him the solitude he asked for and takes everything else. By the close of the medieval age, the night dragon has become a mirror. It shows greed stretched over gold. It shows hunger rolling out of the dark to burn a buyer and paint the sky orange. It shows fear in the tremor of spears when men who would rather be mending fences stand shoulder to shoulder instead. It also shows wit. The right edge, the right bait, the right ground, the right allies. The old fights teach the same thing to lords and plowmen. You face what threatens your home with what you have and who you trust, and you abandon the hope of a fair fight. From these stories, later writers take their language, a barrow under turf, a voice from a scaled throat promising death, a single weak place under a wing, a bright hoard and the reek of smoke, a sword with a name. Of a smirking onlooker who says that tricks are not courage, the dragon walks out of the lane and into the bookshop. It learns to speak at length, it picks up irony, it becomes a character, not just a crisis. And still, if you listen, you can hear the sound of the river sliding over its old scales and see the soot on rafters where something once burned its way in. Then the ground shifts again. Old songs leave the hearth and settle between printed covers with gilt titles. Scholars collect myths the way others collect coins and press them into heavy volumes meant for lamplight and parlors. Children's shelves fill with fairy stories that still carry in faint lines the curves of barrows and saints' days. The monsters have new borders now, neat frames of ink and paper. This is the moment when the dragon steps back to the center of the page. No longer a rumor from the next valley, but a shape that writers can craft deliberately, with memory and with ambition. The first to work this change are antiquarians and collectors. The brothers Grimm put their household tales into print, bringing with them a menagerie of serpents and monsters that had survived in kitchens and fields long after their altars were torn down. Andrew Lang's colored fairy books gather wonders from many countries and shelve dragons beside foolish princes and brave plowmen. A taste for the medieval grows like ivy. Gustave Doré and Arthur Rackham etch dragons in ink so dense it looks like smoke. Poets and novelists reach back toward sagas and chansons. William Morris writes romances that feel like walking down a cold hall lined with woven tapestries. Painters set nights under towers that never knew gunpowder. On the stage, Wagner heaps up a brooding horde and lays a dragon called Fafnir over it. In the music, the serpent is not just a beast. It is the sound of greed stretched out so long that it eats the very voice that sings it. Then, in Oxford, a quiet scholar turns the last lock. John Ronald Reuel Tolkien spends his days with old languages and older poems. He stands in a lecture hall and says that Beowulf should be read for its monsters as much as for its men, that the dragon in that poem is not a mistake, but the hinge on which the whole song turns. At home, in ink and silence, he sets another dragon on another pile of treasure. He gives it a name, a voice, and a cruel sense of humor. In The Hobbit, Smaug wakes like a banked fire pushed at last into open air. He fills the mountain with his breath. He is vain, sharp, amused. He toys with a thief who has dared to creep under his guard. He sniffs out dwarf scent, pony scent, coin scent, and speaks in tones that make the air taste like metal. Tolkien gives him a missing scale, a single flaw where skin is bare. He also gives him something rarer, a mind convinced that it is the only truly clear one in the story. The meeting between the small burglar and the great beast is all talk and tension, a spell of dialogue that pulls the whole history of northern dragons into one hollow mountain. Fafnir is there and the barrow dragon and a faint echo of every horde ever left too long in the dark. In The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien does not put many dragons on stage, but he salts the world with their shadows. The tales of cold drakes from the far north, of a dragon named Scatha slain long before the main story begins, of realms bent around furnaces and forges that loved heat and shadow a little too much. By then, the dragon has crossed another threshold. It is no longer just a beast of river and barrow and sermon, but a creature of literature, carrying in its voice the memory of all the fires that came before. By now, the dragon on the page is less a lurking threat than a long shadow from the past. It is history more than present danger, a way of saying that fire and pride do not die with a single age. For one whole generation of readers that was enough. Smaug alone could haunt 1,000 winter nights, coiled on his hoard in a hollow mountain, breathing heat into the dark of a bedroom lamp. But the creature did not stop with him. Other writers took the old shape and bent it into new meanings. C.S. Lewis turned a sulking, selfish boy named Eustace into a dragon on an island of silent pools and hot springs. He wakes up in a body that looks the way his greed and loneliness feel, armored, isolated, clumsy, aching. He learns what it is to hurt and what it is to wish he could be gentle again. When grace finally peels the scales off, it does not leave him smooth. It leaves a scar like truth always does. Kenneth Grahame had already written about a different sort of monster in The Reluctant Dragon, a dragon who prefers poetry to pillage, and a knight who would rather broker peace than bathe in applause. And together they stage a fight for the village crowd, a performance that lets the story stay alive while the town itself stays quiet. Those tales taught children something new. A dragon could be friend as well as foe, and sometimes the roar in the square is only a ritual that lets people keep their myths and their peace at the same time. Then Ursula K. Le Guin walked in from another shore entirely. In Earthsea, dragons are not mascots or mounts. They speak the true language of the world, a tongue of names so old and exact that human mouths can barely survive it. They do not haggle over coins. They bargain with words that shape reality. They are ancient in a way that makes the lives of men look like sparks blown sideways in the wind. They do not love us and they do not hate us. They recognize kinship. A hard, cool acknowledgement that some human beings still remember the old tongue enough to be worth speaking to. When a wizard learns the name of a wind or a wave, he begins to understand why a dragon needs no walls, no crown, no city to feel complete. In those stories, a dragon is meaning as much as muscle, the living memory of a world before borders and printed maps, when names had weight and saying a thing could change it. Anne McCaffrey stepped across a line fewer had crossed and set dragons down under another sky entirely. On Pern, the beasts are not relics from legend. They are partners, bred and shaped to fight a rain of silver thread that scours land and life from above. A woman touches a hatching dragon, and in that instant a bond fuses that is closer than romance and fiercer than fear. Together, rider and dragon climb into cold air to flame the sky, burning away what would devour field and forest. They speak mind to mind. They leap through space and through a strange fold in time itself. The books are science fiction full of starships and spores and also ballads of labor and loyalty. McCaffrey's dragons live inside a human community. They give more than they take, and when they leave, something vital goes out of the world. The shelves thickened with more lives for the old beast. Terry Pratchett cleared a corner of his flat world for swamp dragons that were anxious, overbred, and explosively combustible, walking jokes that nonetheless had sharp teeth. He also gave us a king of dragons raised by a bookish girl. A creature who has to learn that power without duty is just appetite wearing a crown. Robin Hobb sent ships down a river lined with carved figureheads that are more than wood, toward a sea where half-formed dragons struggle to become themselves. In her work, dragons carry ancient memories in their bones. They have been used, maimed, and stunted by human ambition. When they finally grow into their full strength again, they do not forget. They demand a terrible kind of fairness, one that does not always leave room for human excuses. Naomi Novik looked at the Napoleonic Wars and asked a simple, shattering question. What if dragons flew in formation over Trafalgar? A sea captain, expecting a tidy naval career, instead hatches a dragon by chance and finds his life rewritten. He gives up rank and comfort to become the friend of a mind that will outlive every human he knows. The battles are still about flags and ships, but now they're also about trust between species that share the sky. Christopher Paolini let a farm boy find a stone that was not a stone and use the oldest warmth in storytelling. The bond between a young person and a growing creature that needs them. When the egg cracks, the boy's world cracks with it. Patricia C. Reed invited a princess to bring a tray of tea to a cave and speak to a dragon as you would to a difficult neighbor instead of a nightmare. That quiet decision to talk instead of scream is as brave as any thrust of a lance. Children grew up inside these worlds and carried their dragons with them. They wrote essays and arguments and new stories. Some turned the beasts back into enemies because every tale still needs something to fear. Others made them nations, exiled gods, exhausted survivors, lawyers in expensive suits, mothers who will burn a city down to embers for the sake of one threatened child. The best of these newer works remember a simple rule: the dragon must be a person, not a prop. A hoard is not just a glittering pile. It is a choice to keep what others need. A burst of fire is not just a special effect. It is hunger made visible. A flight over a mountain range is not a line on a map. It is a way of seeing a world that walking feet will never know. When a writer keeps those truths in focus, the dragon on the page draws breath and you can almost feel the warmth against your face. Artists worked beside the writers, setting the modern dragon's bones where everyone could see them. Pauline Baynes drew Smog like a ruby that had learned to move and smirk. Alan Lee and John Howe painted scales that seemed to remember wet stone, fog, and ash. Michael Whelan lit McCaffrey's dragons in skies that feel cold and high enough to sting the lungs. In margins and on covers, a new visual grammar settled in. 4 legs and wings, the great western dragon. A long, wingless, cloud-coiling body, the eastern cousin. Eyes too clear, too knowing. And teeth that look built to work, not just decorations. Claws that could cradle a cup as easily as tear through a shield. Smoke that curls from a muzzle before the flame like a warning. A tail that moves with purpose, not like a leftover rope. The revival in print also taught readers how dragons think. Smog speaks like a con man who likes the sound of his own cleverness. Fafnir mutters deep in the heath, slow and weary, as if centuries have weighed on every word. Earthsea's dragons speak in a language that would turn a human throat to cinders. McCaffrey's dragons are warm and affectionate until danger touches their riders. Then the softness snaps to steel. Pratchett's noble dragon talks like a tyrant who has misread too many philosophy books and decided they all point to him. Hobbes' dragons begin as a confused chorus of half-memories and wake into an anger that sees very clearly who did what to whom. Each voice tells you what the creature means in that world. If it talks like a miser, it will lie on coins. If it talks like a storm, it will not care who comes home dry. If it talks like a friend, it will still be a friend with talons, because truth keeps its edges even when it loves you. Why did all this happen now, and not in the age when people first told stories around a fire? Part of the answer is simple. Printing gave monsters the same long life it gave saints and kings. A child far from moors or fjords can open a book on a city bus and step straight into a cave under a mountain. Another part is hunger. The modern world fills itself with engines, wires, and screens, and then discovers it misses something older. A dragon is a reminder that wealth is not just numbers, that power is not just machinery, that courage may be nothing more than a small figure walking into a dark place with a word ready and a hand steady on a blade. In a century of distant wars and invisible weapons, the old shape lets writers speak about greed that kills from far away, about courage that looks like care instead of noise, about promises between minds that hold when the weather turns cruel. There is also the meeting of worlds. Translators and travelers carried East Asian tales into English and French and many other languages. Dragon kings of rivers and seas, serpents coiled protectively over the meditating Buddha, cloud riders who bring rain to rice fields, they began to appear beside Western worms in picture books and anthologies. Some writers stepped carefully. They wrote dragons of water and cloud who would be insulted by a gold horde. They set an emperor on a dragon throne and asked what that responsibility really meant. Others mixed shapes freely and made hybrids that show where we live now. A world where symbols cross oceans faster than storm fronts. When it is done well, the crossing feels like a bow, not a theft. It lets a reader learn that a dragon can be a neighbor as easily as an enemy, and that water can be holiness as well as hazard. As the shelves sagged, a pattern settled into the bones of the modern dragon tale. Most stories pick one path or weave a few together, the dragon as adversary which demands craft and nerve, the dragon as ally which demands trust and cost, the dragon as mind which demands listening, the dragon as mirror which demands that hard look we give to the part of ourselves that only wants and wants. Good stories braid those strands. A dragon can be a friend and still be a test. A dragon can be a brilliant mind and still be a mouth that burns. So the old beast walked out of the barrow and into the bookshop. It was not tamed and not reduced. It was translated into a language that millions could share. It learned to speak in ink. It learned to think alongside us. It learned to live long enough to move from one reader's hands to another's and to change slightly each time. That is what stories do with the creatures that matter. They keep them in the light and give them new work. Before a dragon ever spread its wings in digital fire on a cinema screen, it stalked through painted backdrops and limelight smoke. 19th century showmen loved a monster. Traveling panoramas unrolled painted battles between knights and scaled beasts, while a hidden organ boomed for the roar. Toy theaters sold cut-out dragons on stiff paper, so a child could stage his own last stand on the kitchen table. When moving pictures arrived, the audience was already waiting. The question became, how do you give weight to something made of story? First came tricks of light. In early fantasy reels, a painted serpent rose from a tank, snapped its jaws, and vanished in a jump cut. Then model makers learned patience. Mid-century adventure films turned to stop motion, frame by frame, to make creatures that could hold the eye. Ray Harryhausen chained a dragon in a cavern and sent it clashing against a cyclops. He coiled a many-headed Hydra around Jason, each neck moving with a mind of its own. The magic lay not only in motion, but in weight. Light from the set seemed to fall across a scaled body that was really there. Highlights caught on ridges. Eyes gleamed. A swinging tail threw a shadow that made a boy in the third row curl his toes inside his shoes. Then, in the early 80s, one film made a great many viewers into believers. Dragon Slayer gave the world Vermithrax, a name like iron dragged across rock. On screen, the dragon crawled, leapt, and glided with cruel grace. Its wings creaked like old leather pulled too tight. Its lair looked wet, smoke-stained, used. Fire poured out in a sheet that seemed to have the weight of water. For once, the land around the lair felt like real countryside fields that had to grow food, villages that had to sleep somewhere near all that fear. There was mud on boots, soot in hair, and terror in voices. People walked out arguing about what they had just seen, then walked back in with new friends to see it again. Since then, designers and animators have been measuring their own dragons against that long, narrow head and those ragged wings. Animation took a different road. When Maleficent turned into a dragon at the end of Sleeping Beauty, it looked as if the cliff itself had grown a spine and stood up. Rage suddenly had scales. Years later, a small boy befriended a green dragon named Elliot who wanted nothing more than to help and to belong. A story about kindness set that creature down in a smoky lumber town and slipped its lesson into children's hearts without raising its voice. Then a white-furred luck dragon coiled through the clouds in the never-ending story and carried a grieving child above ruins and storms. That long body, smiling and strange, was not built to frighten. It was built to say, "Help can arrive from the sky if you dare to call its name." The 90s found yet another way by giving a dragon not just movement, but a human-sounding voice. Dragonheart asked audiences to befriend a creature who would rather crack a joke than swing a claw, but who is still locked to an ancient promise. The mouth moved with the rhythm of the words. The eyes listened. For the first time in many minds, a dragon and a knight stood facing each other as equals, speaking plainly. Not every story of that decade chose gentleness. One film looked at London in ruins and filled the sky above it with hunting silhouettes, dragons nesting in shattered towers, sweeping down to harvest cities in fire. That vision shoved the dragon all the way into the modern world and asked a hard question. If such a creature came back now, with our steel and grit and crowded streets, what would we do? The answers that storytellers began to invent on screen would echo the answers already taking shape on the page, different scales, same old problem. Something vast is coiled above us. We still have to decide how to live under its shadow. By the time dragons settled into our age of screens and cables, they had learned a new trick: how to feel heavy when they are only light. Fantasy epics drove them back into mountains we could walk into with a ticket in our hands. The filmmakers laid Smaug down on a sea of coins and gave him a voice that sounded like iron scraped along stone and gold. When he uncoiled, it was like a flame moving under a roof beam that had been dry for years. The quiet talk between a very small thief and a very large keeper of a hoard pulled its tension from the oldest stories and then wrapped it in new craft. Fire woke on individual coins. Smoke slid along the gold as if it had thoughts of its own. For a breath, the camera loved the armor, the teeth, the gleam. Then it loved a single missing scale. Audiences leaned forward for that soft, dangerous moment when the invincible skin finally admitted a flaw. Somewhere far behind the spectacle, an old rule stirred. Every dragon has a seam, and stories live in the hands that find it. Around the same years, another saga sent 3 young dragons out over cities and snowfields and turned them into instruments of state. They began as creatures that could curl inside a chest, fragile and uncertain. Season by season they grew, bone first, then muscle, then fire, until they could break armies and burn maps bare. The shows did not lie about the price of that power. When a dragon torched a field, you saw the black stubble, the ruined granaries, the faces of people who would have nothing to harvest. For all the banners and speeches, the camera kept coming back to ash and empty hands. On a different branch of the tree, animation chose not terror but trust. A seaside village lived in fear of flying shapes it did not understand. The dragons came by night and took livestock. Fire marked roof beams where children slept. Then one boy did something that no one on his island had thought to do. He walked up to a wounded dragon and held out a shaking hand. He did not shout, he did not swing. He closed his eyes and waited to see if teeth would close on his arm. Instead, a tired, suspicious head lined in. A breath, hot and ragged, warmed his fingers. From that touch, the whole story unrolled, not one of conquest, but of learning how the wind moves around a fin, how a rider must move with a body he cannot bully or command. The music in that film rose the way air rises under wings. Seats seemed to lift as dragon and boy climbed above fog banks and sea stacks. The important scenes were not battles but adjustments. Harnesses rebuilt, saddles restitched, wings tested, trust earned. The point was not the last enemy falling. The point was a life in which humans and dragons fit each other and both were better for the work. Far away from all those northern cliffs, another dragon stretched itself through a different sky. In a bathhouse full of spirits, where the doors never led quite where you thought, a river god appeared as a dragon, long, pale, and lithe, with a face that was kind and wary at the same time. He twisted through air as if it were deep water. The shape did not come out of caves or barrows. It came out of a land that ties dragons to rivers and rain and the memory of places that have been paved over. In that story, there is no horde to raid, no knight with a shining spear. A child does the only work that matters there, she remembers. She learns the true name of the dragon and in speaking it, frees him to be what he really is, not a servant, not a pet, not a monster, but the soul of a river once nearly forgotten. The treasure in that tale is not gold. It is the act of knowing and the courage to let go when the time comes. Television had been practicing for dragons long before any studio spent fortunes on fire. In the 80s, a group of children stepped into a cartoon world built from dice and rulebooks. They met a many-headed queen of evil, a dragon whose faces seemed to tilt in different directions at once. For many viewers, that was the first time the creature had more than one mood, more than one voice. Decades later, another series asked a harder question. What does it feel like when dragons are not rumors, but undeniable facts that anyone can watch from a city wall? And to answer, it took a small army of artists. The beasts began as sketches and maquettes and rubber heads on sticks, then slowly became presences that bent grass and stirred dust. They flung shadows that made soldiers blink and squint and duck, even when everyone on set knew the sky was green cloth. On screen, the dragons did more than burn. They slept like vast dogs in courtyards. They snapped chains and rattled them. They cracked bones when they fed. The audience began to tell one mood from another, the roll of the eye for boredom, the drawn-back lip for anger, the restless wing for hunger. Games, quietly and steadily, turned dragons into exams that a player could only pass by learning. At tables scattered across basements and kitchens, the first role-playing book set dragons as the measure of a party's nerve. One queen with 5 furious heads ruled a lair of lava and ruin. One ancient, shining king of the skies held a cold, lawful calm. Their names slipped from rulebooks into novels, then back into late-night game sessions where friends argued about plans over dice. On screens, an open world let a wanderer shout in a lost language and drag a dragon out of the clouds. The fight that followed felt half duel, half hunt. You listened for the low roll of a roar across the ridge. You watched the way the shadow twisted when it dived. You counted breaths between bursts of flame. You learned which ruined tower would break a line of sight and which would become your tomb if you misstepped. Other games set dragons as the last guardians in dungeons no map fully explained. Some made them gods in flesh, to be bargained with or fled from. Some let you raise one from an egg and carry it on your shoulders, only to discover that love for a dragon can complicate every decision in a war. In every version, the old pattern remained. Knowledge first, courage next, luck if it comes at all. Card tables and living room floors filled up with dragons that lived on cardboard and flickering screens. A red-winged icon with a jagged name took pride of place in a trading deck. A wise elder dragon sat at the center of a whole invented history, thinking in centuries and shattering worlds with intention more than muscle. Children traded a white-scaled dragon whose blue eyes were drawn like lightning, the name printed in bold letters meant to be shouted. In another show, a boy gathered 7 glowing spheres and called up a sky serpent who granted wishes in a voice like distant thunder. These dragons were not just enemies to beat. They were trophies, puzzles, goals, the prize at the heart of a good afternoon that would be retold all week on school steps. Music and sport borrowed the outline and filled it with breath. On one flag, a red dragon curls over green and white, flying from castle walls and rugby grounds, keeping a small country's memory awake. A club walks onto a pitch with a dragon stitched over their hearts, and a stadium turns into a mouth of drums and chanting. A university tells its students to be dragons and to learn to breathe a kind of honest fire into their work, not destruction, but intensity. Here, the old fear has mostly gone. Pride remains. The dragon stands for grit, for refusing to fold in the last minutes of a tight match, for lungs that keep drawing air when the hill is steep and the crowd is loud. Theme parks and parades let dragons move right through the middle of crowds as if a festival were a book you could walk inside. A wire frame wrapped in silk winds above heads, guided by hands you can't quite see while drums mark the rhythm of each twist and dip. Elsewhere, a dragon clings to a bank roof and breathes timed fire over a waiting crowd. The heat is real, but the danger is not. Small children squeal and jump back, then laugh as their faces cool. Merchants watch those faces carefully. Soon the shelves fill with plush and plastic, with rubber wings and painted eyes. Miniature modelers sit under lamps, carving tiny scales with knives and brushes. Painters learn how to give a dragon's eye that glassy, unnerving, alive look even from 3 feet away. Nature shows add their own dry reminder. The cameras follow a heavy lizard through Indonesian scrub and call it by a very old name. It does not breathe fire. It does not fly. It walks slowly, tongue tasting the air, and reminds anyone watching that a mouth full of bacteria and a tail that can break bone are quite dragon enough for a man who steps too close. Another program stages a pretend excavation and asks, with a straight face, what dragon skeletons might look like if they had ever existed. Scientists play along. They explain the weight of wings, the reality of bones, the chemistry that makes fire a problem. Viewers are left holding both things at once, the dream and the reasons it does not quite fit in a museum case. The technology quietly rewrote the grammar of dragons on screen. Rubber and wire could move a head and flap a pair of wings. Computer-generated imagery could send a ripple along a whole spine, from nostrils to tail. The best work mixed the two. A flame that looks real often begins as a torch or a gas rig in front of a camera, and only later becomes a curtain of fire that fills a cavern and scorches a shield. Ash sticks to an actor's cheek because a makeup artist was up at dawn pressing charcoal into skin. A rider leans against a rough leather saddle bolted to a metal frame that bucks like a mechanical bull, while all around is only a blank wall that will, months later, turn into clouds and mountains. The difference between a dragon that stays in your memory and one that vanishes with the credits is not just budget. It is whether the people making it remember how light falls on a real surface, how weight makes muscles slide, how an old creature would move if it had its own history and habits. Through all those shapes, the same old bones of meaning show through. Greed calls trouble to itself. Power without duty costs more than any city can pay. Trust can turn fear into something usable. Names still have weight. A dragon watching a spring in a medieval carving and a dragon coiled around a logo on a splash screen are doing similar work. They say, something important is guarded here. Pay attention. Whenever a dragon descends into a story now, that story has to make a choice. Is this creature a storm that must be endured, a neighbor that might be understood, or a mirror held up to someone who has taken too much? The best tales do not rush the answer. They let the dragon be terrible and noble by turns. They give the audience time to feel awe before anyone raises a weapon. So the dragon lives now in dark theaters and on sofas, at kitchen tables on game night and in schoolyards at recess, on team jerseys and glowing phone screens. It is a jump scare and a ringtone, a mascot and a bedtime threat. It is also still the shape your mind reaches for when a thunderhead stacks itself over a hot field, and for a moment, the cloud looks exactly like a spine and a head turning toward you. You might smile at yourself. Your heart still beats faster. If you could gather every dragon we have walked past in this story and set them side by side, you would see something else as well. Each one wears the landscape that imagined it. In lands where rivers rule the year, the dragon is long-bodied and fluid, sliding through cloud and rain as if they were its own thoughts. In places where winters bite and barrow stud the hills, the dragon lies heavy on treasure and on memory, coiled around what the dead left behind. In kingdoms where rulers must prove that heaven permits their rule, the dragon climbs banners, robes, and roof tiles as a living signature of authority. The creature is a mirror for the work a people must do to stay alive. It teaches by fear and by favor. It shows you what a community calls sacred and what it thinks is dangerous. In China, the dragon speaks of water, order, and right rule. It coils in cloud and dives in rivers. It hunts a pearl that painters always place just out of reach, a bright knot of thunder, wisdom, or fate that only the rightful can approach. The five-clawed dragon on an emperor's robe is not decoration. It is a promise that rains will come in season, that canals and granaries will be tended with care. On palace walls, 9 dragons stare from a sea of glazed waves so that courtiers will not forget whose favor keeps the state afloat. In the streets, dragons become boats and dances. A drumbeat turns to thunder. A silk body rides the air down an alley lined with lanterns. A whole city, for one night, moves in time and asks the year ahead to be gentle. Even in the sky, old astronomers placed a dragon in the east to guard spring. Here, the dragon is rarely an enemy. It is patron and ancestor, a being that gives the farmer hope and the magistrate a measure. It also gives the ruler a warning, because a year of floods or droughts can be read as a dragon turning away. Across India and Southeast Asia, serpent kings show how tightly water and life are knotted together. A naga with a fan of many hoods rises at the foot of a stair or coils around a spring. A bridge at Angkor runs between stone bodies that curve like river snakes, so that every step into the temple passes through the strength of the deep. A village in Bengal honors Manasa to keep snakebite away and to ask for the right rains at the right time. A statue of Mukalinda spreads its hoods above the meditating Buddha, telling anyone who looks that wisdom does not float above storms. It sits through them, sheltered but not removed. In Laos and Thailand, river towns keep serpent shrines where brown water twists and eddies like something thinking. Boat races churn the surface while bells ring on the banks and incense curls into the humid air. The prayers are straightforward. Let the harvest be just enough, let the floods be not too much. Everywhere the lesson is the same: speak to the river with respect, keep the banks in repair, make your offerings. If you insult the powers below the surface, or grow careless with the dikes and walls, a serpent will show you how quickly fortune can turn. Korea and Japan add their own threads to this cloth. In Korean tales, an emugi is a great serpent that waits and endures. If it survives long enough and wins a fallen pearl of light, it becomes a true dragon and climbs into the clouds. That quiet story tells a child by a pawn that patience and worth can lift a life higher than birth ever promised. In Japan, a dragon often waits at a temple basin, cast in bronze, pouring a slender stream of water for hands and mouths to wash before prayer. The shape keeps the act from becoming an empty habit. It reminds each visitor that water is a gift and a trust, and that names matter. Many of those dragons are also sea gods in disguise, keepers of tides and storms who answer only to their own rules. When a child in such a place learns the name of a river and says it softly with respect, the river ceases to be a colored line on a map. It becomes a neighbor, a long, coiling presence that must be lived with, watched, and when possible, befriended. In the West, a dragon carries a different weight because the land itself asks different things of the people who live on it. In Greek, the word drakon comes from a root that means to look sharply, to keep a hard, unblinking watch. So the creature appears exactly like that, coiled beside a spring or a sacred grove, never sleeping. It wraps itself around a fleece that glows in shadow, around a tree hung with golden apples. It is not just a brute. It is the watcher of a boundary, the guardian of a world that already has its rules. Anyone who wants to kill it or even to slip past it has to prove more than raw courage. They have to prove they are in the right. The fight is never just a duel. It is the moment a whole landscape changes. Delphi does not become Apollo's oracle until Python lies dead beside the spring. Thebes does not rise until Cadmus pays for the serpent he kills, and until the teeth he sows grow into armed men who will build its walls. Each city begins with a dragon as a price, a life that has to be spent to make room for something new. Far to the north, the dragon learns new hungers. There, people bury their wealth in mounds and lay it in graves. There, winter makes food and coin feel like two faces of the same need. So the dragon curls on treasure and refuses to move. It becomes a warning in flesh, greed that lies warm in the dark until a single missing cup wakes it into fire. Fafnir is not born a monster. He is a man who loved gold until he became the thing that loves it most. The dragon in Beowulf is the last trial of a king who has done his duty and must still pay one more time. Níðhöggr, gnawing at the root of the world tree, is the slow reminder that every good thing has something working at its base, and that neglect invites rot. Jörmungandr, sleeping in the sea with its tail in its mouth, makes even honest sailors feel small when they look to the horizon and imagine the ring under the waves. None of these shapes is just a monster. Each is a way to talk about winter, about hoarded wealth, about trouble that waits patiently, and about the cost of keeping a people safe. When the age of the church comes, the dragon puts on moral clothing. Villagers want stories that speak plainly about sin and hope, so the scaled belly becomes a book you can read in the open air. Pride coils in the dark. Greed lies on a hoard while plague breathes from its mouth. Into that picture walks a saint with worn boots and a familiar prayer, words said at dawn for 1,000 mornings. He blesses a well and the water runs clear again. Sometimes the dragon lowers its head to a strip of cloth and lets itself be led by a woman who sings a psalm. Sometimes it dies under a lance only after a town promises to change its ways. High above, gargoyles rain from cathedral roofs and spit rain away from the carved saints. The old serpent that once fouled the water is carved into a servant that keeps the walls dry. The sermon written in stone is simple and firm. Order the world, honor what feeds you, and do not clutch more than your share while your neighbor's child goes hungry. Elsewhere, the serpent is not a terror at all but a teacher. Across Mesoamerica, among Maya and Mexica, the feathered serpent rises as a god of wind, learning, and the burden of rule. A being with a snake's body and a crown of quetzal plumes moves between sky and earth. He brings laws for cities and calendars that keep fields in step with the sun. On the equinox, the shadow of a stepped pyramid falls in such a way that a serpent of light seems to slide down the stone to meet the people waiting below. This is not a dragon crouched on stolen gold. It is a lord of order, and his gifts are edged. Knowledge in these stories comes with a price. The one who carries it must accept limits, or the very powers that granted it will punish the misuse. Heraldry and emblems keep these meanings alive long after the old rites fade. A red dragon rises from the flag of a small nation that remembers centuries of fighting for its own name. A white thunder dragon snarls from the flag of a mountain kingdom and warns travelers that storms and conscience both matter there. A city sets a dragon on its bridge, and a knight on its seal rides down a serpent that could be a demon, or simply a dangerous snake from the next field. Roman cavalry once rode under a standard with a metal head and a cloth body that snapped and roared in the wind. The shape said the same thing every time. We are watching, we will not be shifted easily, and we claim the ground beneath our feet. Old books of learning draw the serpent into their diagrams as well. In the margins of treatises, a snake bites its own tail and closes into a circle. Beside it, a quiet note explains what the sea serpent and the world-encircling dragon already say in louder language. Is everything feeds what comes next. Endings turn into beginnings. The wise pay close attention to the seam where one becomes the other. A dragon coiled around the world in a poem does the same work with brighter fire. As across all these stories, a few truths repeat until they feel like laws carved into bone. The first, water is life and power over water is power over life. Wherever a dragon rules cloud and river, people must learn respect, and rulers must learn how to deserve the robe they wear. The second, wealth hidden in the dark rots whoever lies on it. When a dragon sprawls across a horde, it is only a matter of time before some thin, determined figure digs a trench, lies in it with a sword, and wakes something that will burn a village whether it wins or loses. The third, boundaries matter. Springs, doorways, bridges, the edges of fields, these belong to no one and to everyone. A watcher at those thresholds is a friend if you keep your promises and an enemy if you break them. The fourth, courage is both private and public. A saint with a leash, a knight with a spear, a cobbler with a sack of sulfur, a farmer in a coat whose cloth bristles with knives, a magistrate who fasts and pleads for rain. A mother who brings the torch at the exact moment a wound must be seared. Each one steps forward so that others can drink, plant, sleep, and wake to work. And beneath all of it lies the last truth. Dragons are never just one thing. They can bless or blight. They can stand for pride or for rightful rule. They can burn barns to cinders or pour clean water from a stone mouth in the rain. That is why they do not fade. A culture can lay both its fears and its hopes across the same scaled back and still be understood. A story can move from field to palace, from shrine to schoolroom, and the creature at its center remains strong enough to carry every meaning without breaking. Put the pieces together, and the pattern is clear. A riverside village sees a long shape in the clouds and beats drums to call the rain. A court that claims heaven's favor embroiders dragons on its robes and trembles when floods come and the granaries stand empty. A great hall that keeps too much gold learns what form guilt takes when it sleeps in a mound. A church that serves the poor finds a way to set the beast on a gutter, spitting the rain off the walls. A nation that needs courage for a hard match or a hard winter gives itself a dragon and holds the line under its gaze. Through it all, the creature stays what it has always been, a face for power that can heal or harm, a test for the heart that grips the spear, a story that teaches work and watchfulness in the old language of fire, water, and scale. Imagine the scene being taught in that old tale. A lord stands with a knife drawn beside a sleeping monster. 3 men steady a sack beneath its jaw. A priest leans close, whispering a prayer not for safety, but for direction, asking that the final breath of the dragon bless the stone rather than curse it. The whole moment feels like a ritual held on the edge of disaster, a bargain struck between nerve and doom. Myths often hide their lessons inside danger. This one ties courage to cost. It teaches that anything won at great risk carries a value that peaceful hands can never imitate. And when nature leaves strange objects behind bones, teeth, shapes in stone, people rarely ignore the invitation. A giant shark's tooth becomes a dragon's tongue on a bishop's desk. The bishop presses it to the throat of a man he believes poisoned, and when the patient recovers, the tooth earns a place among relics. A crocodile's skin nailed to a church beam becomes proof of a crusader's tale. Children grow up beneath it. They inherit not the science but the feeling, the fear, and the relief that accompanies its defeat. When a fisherman vanishes in a fog and 2 bodies wash ashore days later, the priest gestures toward the skin and tells the village that old powers have not withdrawn from the world, and that fear still knows the shape it wants to wear. There is a practical wisdom beneath these stories too. A dragon makes an excellent villain because its size forces a community to stand together. It is large enough to threaten a city, but not a neighbor whose feud could last generations. A dragon hoards springs, roads, bridges, places a community depends on. It demands cattle or coin or a rhythm of offerings. It gives a deadline. Unlike a creeping monster that stalks cottage to cottage, a dragon waits, visible, inevitable. It can be faced, and a good story loves an enemy that can be faced. A dragon is also the perfect test. Its hide turns blades. Its breath breaks courage. The only path to victory lies in finding the seam, some narrow, hidden weakness discovered by someone patient enough to listen, watch, or ask for help. It is the kind of truth a mother tells a child beside a winter fire. Be brave, yes, but be clever first. And never be too proud to carry water for the one holding the torch. Knights learn it in songs. Villagers learn it by laying a muddy plank across a ditch, so the hunter crouched in the trench can rise just high enough to thrust the spear upward. The dragon's story teaches two trades at once: how to work leather and how to shape a soul. Greed also needs a body, and dragons have long provided one. When people bury silver in royal barrows, something in the village wonders what becomes of that wealth beneath the earth. A dragon simplifies the fear. It says the horde sleeps like a beast and wakes like one, and that if the living fail the promises made to the dead, a life will be taken in payment. Centuries later, the same beast takes on a new face. As a banker in a warm hall holds too much while a city goes hungry. The mind does not picture ledgers or interest. It summons a dragon slumped over gold, one dull eye fixed on the pile, unwilling to let anyone else breathe. Writers still use that image. They only have to place the creature in a first chapter and readers understand the stakes without a word of arithmetic. Dragons carry another truth. Power is not kind unless someone requires it to be. A ruler seated on a throne shaped like a dragon already announces a kingdom judged by rain, riverbanks, and the keeping of public works. If the floods rise at the wrong month, the people do not blame the weather. They say the dragon has turned its head away. In another land, a queen walks with 3 young dragons and learns that fire carried in one's orbit is glory mixed with suffering. To lead such power without ruin demands mercy walking beside flame. The beast makes the cost of authority visible. You can see it glowing in the eyes, stretching across the fields of ash left behind. Look at the places where dragons returned strongest in the last century and the pattern becomes clear. The world was ready for them. Industrial life herded millions into cities. Weather faded into background noise behind factory bells and timetables. Something older, river, stone, mountain, storm, pulled at people from under the noise. Dragons stepped back in through ink, through paint, through orchestral brass booming as stage curtains lifted over cavern mouths. At the same time, science told a truer story about the bones in the ground. As a boy in a classroom could study a diagram of a saurian creature and then open a book to see a red-scaled dragon curled on treasure and feel the rightness of both. One truth belonged to the earth. The other truth belonged to the heart. And together they kept wonder alive. Children especially welcomed the creature back. They want something to fear and something to love. They want to test themselves against cliffs they cannot fall from. A dragon provides both. A friend if approached with care, an enemy if approached with arrogance. It becomes a schoolmaster who teaches without scolding, letting the young stand before something immense and walk away unbroken. And then there is flight and fire. Humans have always looked up. Birds taught us envy. Dragons let us pretend. To imagine rising from a cliff on wide wings, to imagine warmth and danger pouring from your own breath, it is not a cruel dream. It is practice for adulthood, for moments when one must rise and must choose when to be fierce or gentle. Behind these human reasons is the oldest pull of all. Many traditions say a serpent holds the world, or circles it, or threatens it. The symbol gives us a handle on the idea that creation is unfinished, that the world must be tended. You can frame that idea in ritual, carve it into a canal, stitch it into a jersey, or cast it onto a film screen glowing brighter than noon. The feeling stays the same. We like to see the thing that frightens us, steadies us, and watches us. We like to imagine standing before it with something in our hands that will do. And then comes the strangest truth. The dragons are so clear a shape that they can become anything and still be themselves. A river spirit under a temple roof, an old king of the barrows, a saint's lesson chiseled in stone, a winter-voiced monster in a cavern, a winged partner carrying a rider through rain, a banner over a gate, a toy above a crib. The shape endures. The meaning shifts like weather sliding across mountains. But the creature keeps walking through every change, vast as ever, scaled with memory and with need. Dragons endure because stone keeps secrets and gives them up one jaw at a time. Because fear keeps watch and imagination keeps giving fear a face. Because a community sometimes needs a common enemy and a common ally sewn into the same body. Because gold is still heavy, because storms still come, because rulers still need judgment, because children still whisper one more story when the fire has gone low and someone gets up to close the door.